Hey everyone, cassydraws here and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to paint a German Shepherd portrait in acrylics, but before we get started, a big shout out to our channel sponsors Chartpak, Grumbacher, and Molotow. Their links can be found in the description box below. Let's go ahead and get started. So to get started on your painting, you're going to want to make sure that you have your German Shepherd sketched out onto your canvas, panel, paper, whatever surface you are choosing to work on today. Make sure that you have a nice foundation and a nice sketch to work from. Whether you choose to use the grid method like I have done with my painting, or a light table, freehand, however you choose to get your sketch down onto your surface is entirely up to you. Once you have your sketch down onto your canvas, we're going to go ahead now and start outlining the most important aspects of this portrait. Now, what I mean by that is we are going to do a dark outline around the eyes, the nose, the mouth, maybe the ears, whatever aspect of this painting you feel is the most important or maybe the most difficult for you. We're going to cement this sketch with a nice black outline. And the reason why I do this in my paintings and I find it helpful is so that no matter how many base layers I put down, and usually I work a little bit translucent, we'll get to that, but no matter how many base layers I put down on this initial painting portrait, these black outlines are always going to shine through from underneath. And so there have been many times where I've actually covered over it and I've lost the anatomy or the structure of this face. I've made the eyes too far apart, too close together, maybe the nose a little bit short or too long. And so by cementing this sketch in with this dark outline, we can make sure that no matter what we do, we always have this anatomy correct and proportionate. Once your outlines are completed, we're going to go ahead now and block in all of the dark aspects or dark markings around this German Shepherd portrait. Now, my German Shepherd painting had a lot of dark markings around the muzzle, the back, the forehead, in and around the eyes. Keep in mind that these locations may change with your reference, but the concept is the same. We're going to block in all of the dark areas that we can see before we really start to add in any color whatsoever. So just working at this point in black and white. As a little side note, something that I like to do as well after those larger, darker areas are blocked in is I like to water down my paint and just go around the canvas and find some of those lighter shadows that aren't as dark and block those in with a little bit of a watered down glaze. Once you're feeling good about your outlines and your blocked in elements, what I like to do now is I like to just go in and fill in this background, get it out of the way. For me, I find the backgrounds in portraits to be kind of the most boring aspect of them, and so I like to get this done as soon as possible. Not only does it help me feel as though I am way further along in this portrait than I actually am, it's kind of like a mind trick, but it also really does help my eyes as I am painting this portrait, so it is not just all of this stark white canvas. It just kind of fills it in, gives you a really nice middle tone, and actually for me helps actually paint the subject itself. So the next step in our painting together is going to be working on the base layers of this German Shepherd. Now, depending on your reference, these colors may vary, but what I like to do is I like to start off with a very translucent base. So what I'll do is I will take a look at my reference and I will find a really nice middle tone color to work from. So I'm going to pick a color that is kind of right in the middle that still allows me to add in some highlights and shadows later on in the process of this painting. I don't want to go too dark or too light, so try to find something that is kind of right in the middle. Once you have the color chosen that works best for your reference, what I like to do is I like to add water to it to make it a little bit more on the translucent side. And the reason being is because this is our first base layer, so we are essentially just blocking in where these colors should go, and we still want the darker details that we've blocked in to shine through. So I'm not getting caught up with making sure that the details are correct. This is purely just giving us a guide or a roadmap for our later portions of the painting that are much more important. If you're enjoying today's video and would like to see the entire painting finished in a much slower, more in-depth pace, consider heading over to my Ko-fi page, where I offer exclusive memberships for those who are looking for a much more in-depth art experience with me and the various mediums that I cover, such as acrylic and watercolor. For as low as $5 Canadian a month, you will receive exclusive tutorials that are not seen on YouTube, behind-the-scenes posts, polls for future projects, exclusive discounts, and access to our community Discord. Please head over to ko-fi.com/cassydraws for more information. And of course, just remember, Ko-fi, no fees. All of your tips and support to Ko-fi creators go directly to the creator themselves. Thank you so much, and let's continue on with today's painting. So the next step in our portrait painting is to work on the eyes of the subject now. And how I go about creating these eyes is I will choose a color that is suitable for a base. Much like the concept that we use for the fur of the German Shepherd when we chose a base color, we are going to repeat the same thing for the eyes. So choose a nice middle tone color, and from there we are going to work on adding these shadows in layer by layer. Every time my hand leaves the canvas to my palette paper, I am darkening this color about 10 to 15% for each layer. So that means I could have 5 to 6 to 7 layers of just shadow within these eyes themselves. And this will make sure that the eyes look nice in 3D, they look round and realistic, and really have a nice shape to them before we start adding in these highlights. So the next step is to go ahead and add in the highlights. Now, depending on the color you have chosen, you may need to have a little bit of a base before you can go in and add in these lighter tones to this eye. And so I find helpful to add in a white, pure white base to the areas that are the lightest, and then glaze in this lighter color over top. So I've used this kind of reddish yellow sort of orange hue on top, and I've just put that in over top of this white base, and you can see just by adding a little bit underneath, this really tends to pop right off the canvas. So if you find that you're having issues with a translucent color, just drop in a white base and glaze over top, and hopefully that will help you. Now, my favorite part of eyes arguably is the catchlight. I find it to be the most interesting, visually appealing, and it brings your portrait to life. So really take your time through this part of the painting. Keep in mind the shape of the eye. Keep in mind the roundness. Are there any sort of reflections that are happening in this catchlight? Maybe it is the photographer or some eyelashes. Maybe it is a sort of top lit photo, so the eyelashes are casting a shadow. All of these details you're going to want to include to make your portrait look much more realistic. So keep that in mind, layer, 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 and really work through this part of the painting quite slowly. All right, so the next step in our painting, once that eye is completed, is to slowly start to block in the areas surrounding the eye. Now, up until this point, we've only done our first base layer. So what I'd like to do is I like to go in over top and add in a second layer to kind of solidify this area a little bit further. You can see that I'm adding multiple colors and I'm kind of changing the color or the tone up every single time my hand leaves this canvas. And the reason being is because no dog, no animal, etc. will always have the same colored fur throughout the painting. There is always going to be some slight variations and color shifts depending on lighting, markings, texture, dirt, etc. So keep that in mind that you don't want to have this kind of static plain color throughout. You're going to want to add this in and kind of change it up a little bit. So once you have that initial base layer done and you're feeling good about the colors you have working in your portrait, we can go ahead now and start working on some more of the finer details and polishing up this fur all the way around this German Shepherd. Now, I will say, no matter how you choose to work as an artist, whether you are following along with today's video and working in a puzzle piece type way like I do, or if you choose to work in a more of an underpainting type way and with a lot of layering around the entire portrait, it does not matter, and both of those techniques will achieve you the exact same result. So I just want to disclaimer that even though I choose to show you in one way, don't ever feel as though you have to change your style and what works best for you. Use these techniques and apply them to your own artwork and see how they feel, and if whether they work for you or not. Hopefully they do, but take what you like and leave what you don't. So what I like to do with my fur is I like to start with the darkest colors possible that I can see in this German Shepherd's fur. Now, some of these areas may be a skin fold. So for example, we're around the smile lines, I like to call them on dogs. You get a lot of this kind of skin fold action, sometimes on really hairy or furry dogs as well. You can kind of get a lot of fur overlap, or maybe it's their markings. So this German Shepherd on the canvas left-hand side has this sort of darker block of fur that I had to put in as well. So go around your reference and your portrait and find all of the darkest areas you can and start there with blocking in your fur details. I think it's important to note as well when talking about the shadow and the fur detail is that I always like to start off with the biggest brush possible. So depending on my canvas size, of course, these brush sizes will change, but I always like to work with the largest one I have available. And the reason being is because I like to cover the most area possible, and I know that I'm going to be doing a lot of layering with my midtone and my highlight, so I want this to be kind of like a big forgive me, but canvas to work from this shadow. And as I slowly start to progress to that mid-tone color by lightening my shadow color or kind of choosing a different color altogether that's lighter, I'm going to decrease the size of my brush. So I'm going from a larger brush, let's say, to a medium brush for these midtones. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I don't want to cover over all of the hard work that I've done with getting the anatomy correct and the placement of these shadows. I want some of these areas to shine through so that it looks realistic and that it looks as though the fur is, like we said, overlapping or kind of folding over one another. So just keep that in mind to really switch up your brush strokes or even the brush in general. Sometimes switching your brush from a different shape or size can really help you achieve this really nice, realistic look, if you will. And to the highlight, the last step will be the smallest brush I have available, and of course, the lightest color. And with your highlights, you're always going to want to be a little bit more picky of where you place these. So really paying attention to your lighting in the reference photo and just where they fall onto the subject. So I don't want to then again cover over all of my midtone and my shadow and make everything this really light blown out color. I want it to have a really nice gradient to that highlight and kind of be really choosy of where that is. So the next step in our portrait together is to go ahead and start to block in the nose area now of this German Shepherd. And what I'll do is I will start with a nice 50% gray, so not too light and not too dark, and I'll just go in and I'll start to block in all of these values that I see. Now you will notice on this portrait and most pet portraits as well is the top of the dog's nose is much more illuminated and the front side of it is usually more heavily shadowed. So I like to get that blocked in right away so that I don't lose track of it. That way I know how wide it has to be or how far down it goes, and I can just kind of keep this information throughout as I start refining it further. Now, what I like to do for the top or the textured part of this nose is to use a much lighter gray, and I will usually have 2 to 3 layers of these lighter grays as well. And I just like to stipple in some of this sort of rubbery texture onto the dog's nose. So if you were to find a really zoomed in picture of a dog's nose, you will notice that there are these tiny little dots and circles there that make up this texture. So I found by using a really small brush, a really small detailer, and just going in and adding in some of these dots throughout really kind of made this texture easy and quite simple rather to paint in. So that's what works for me. Some of you may have a different method. Please let me know down in the comments below, but so far this seems to be the most successful for me. And the little tip and trick that I will say to you as well is don't get caught up in putting all of those tiny little dots that you see as well. You can see that some of these areas I just omitted entirely, and I found that having it really heavily textured was kind of distracting. So I like to just keep some of those areas clean and just a normal gray pattern and not necessarily stippled. So hopefully you find that helpful. So the next step in our portrait together is going to be to work on the mouth of our German Shepherd now. So what I like to start with first is actually connecting the mouth to the side of the face and the top of the face as well. So I want to give the teeth and the tongue a base to kind of stand on. So I'm going to go ahead and work in this gum line. You can see here that I'm adding in all kinds of different color shifts. And the reason being is because most of these sort of areas on, I know Labradors, my lab has it, German Shepherds, they do have this sort of marbly look to it, a lot of brown, black, and pink as well. So you can see here that I'm doing a lot of color shifts. I'm making this color very quite light in a lot of places as well to indicate that it is shiny. It is a little slimy sometimes. If you're not a dog person, you might be cringing right now, but dogs drool a lot. Their mouth is usually just a hot mess. So just keep that in mind that you're going to want to have a lot of different colors mixed for this part of the painting and really get in that slimy, shiny element. That's the biggest piece of advice I can give is don't forget your stark white highlights on those gums. Now with the teeth too, I think it's important to note as well that you can see here that I'm using a much more bone colored, enamel colored, a little bit more on the yellow side. And this is because no dog's teeth, and human for that matter, are pure white. They are bone natural color. So keep that in mind that, although it might look really, really stark yellow at first, once you start getting in those shadows as well, it kind of tones it down a little bit. So just keep that in mind that you're going to want to make sure those are accurately colored. And from there, I'm going to be doing a lot of glazes. So on the sides of the teeth, underneath the tongue as well. Rather than worrying about mixing all of these different pink colors and yellow colors, I just came in with a glaze on top of this. So I watered down some black paint and I just went in and put in those shadows myself. And I found that to be the most effective for this area. It is such a small area to work in that the glaze was just kind of the best option. Now you'll see back and forth between this tongue, the mouth. I'm kind of just finalizing some details. So I'm just finalizing some glazes. I'm adding in some more of those dark shadow elements that I could see on this German Shepherd were not the darkest that I could take them. So I'm just kind of farting around. I like that. I'm just kind of farting around, noodling around in some of these areas and just prepping for the finished part of this painting. So the last step is going to be to finish off the chest or bust area and the back of this German Shepherd. Now I'm going to rinse and repeat the same techniques that I used earlier in this painting for the face fur with the chest as well. I'm going to start with the darkest colors that I can see and of course adding in those markings, working to an eventual mid-tone and then adding in the highlight towards the very end. Now, the biggest difference between the face fur and the body fur is that I'm going to be using a larger brush and I'm going to make sure that this body of the subject is much softer and a little bit blurry. I'm going to achieve a little bit of a blurriness using a glaze and a dry brush. And the reason being is because I want the portrait, so the face of this subject, to shine through. And I don't want the body to subtract from the attention that the eyes and the nose and the mouth and all of those identifiable features are going to get from the viewer. So I just want it to be there to complete the portrait, but I don't want it to take away. So just keep that in mind by really adding in some glazes, a little bit of a minimal highlight, and really kind of getting those darker tones in will kind of help push your focus to the face of your subject. All right, and there you have it. There is our finished German Shepherd portrait. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to leave a like and a comment if you did. Let me know your favorite part of today's video. And don't forget to hit that little subscribe button and the bell to be notified when I upload next. Also, as a reminder, you can catch this video in its entirety, more in-depth and a slower pace, available on my Ko-fi, link in the description box below. And I can't wait to see you guys in the next video. Thank you for your support always, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks, guys!